And today now neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism is that now it's everybody against each other, black versus white, men against women, straight against gay, etc., right? And so they've created this division, but what they've also done is they've created this victim mentality.
Nomad Capitalist live in Mexico City. I'm Andrew Henderson. We're joined by investor, entrepreneur, macroeconomic commentator, very popular guy, Mark Moss. Good to see you here in Mexico City.
Thanks, Andrew. Always happy to be in Mexico City and happy to be here with you.
You have been all over the world. You're telling me about ranches and you're building property here in Mexico. I'm going to get into the way that the world is changing. I want to hear about your personal footprint and why each of these places are important.
Yeah, well, I think the world has never been more uncertain than it is right now, at least from my viewpoint. Maybe in other times of history it has been, but it seems like it's just so uncertain. I think the longer term picture seems pretty clear to me, but how do we get from here to there? And I don't know. And so I believe that the way we beat uncertainty is with optionality. Right. So the more options, the better.
That's what we talk about.
This is what you talk about, right? And so I want to be prepared for that. And so, I have expanded my personal footprint. So I live in California, which people call Commifornia.
Sorry to hear that, but
people say they're sorry to hear that. The reality is that I don't realize any of it. You don't notice any of it on your life. I'm the first to say that Gavin Newsom is competing to be the worst governor, and they're passing laws that are just so bad, and in California, sure. But the reality is, it doesn't affect my life at all. But I do see what's coming, right? So I see what's coming. And so there's a point, and we saw what happened through the pandemic and how strict they were. And so I do see that there's a good chance, a probable chance, that things get to a point where I'd have to leave. So if that happens, where do I go, right?
And what is that trigger, by the way?
Well, the trigger for me is ultimately freedom. I will not ever live locked down somewhere if there's somewhere else I can go and be free, period. Above everything. So last night you had put 3 areas of focus, and you had put finances, lifestyle, and freedom, I think.
Yep.
I think that was
finance, freedom, and lifestyle. Those are the three.
Finance, freedom, and lifestyle. And I would reorder that.
Okay.
So for me, it's all about hierarchies, right? So for me, it's freedom, number one.
And that's like 80% or something like that for you.
That's first and foremost. Everything has to be looked at that first. So I will not live locked down if I can go live somewhere else for free. So lifestyle fits underneath that. So after then, if I have to, okay, now these are areas I can go be somewhat free. Where does lifestyle fit in? And then below that is then finance.
So you're looking at where are you most free? And then where do I feel comfortable? That could be weather, that could be lifestyle, that could be language, whatever. And then from there, okay, where are they going to take less of my money?
Yeah. And it's not about less of my money. And I think people are confused on that piece specifically. Right. I talked to someone last night at the cocktail hour about that. And she says, well, I just need to go somewhere where I can be taxed less. And I said, why? And she says, well, because I can have a better life if I keep more of my money. I said, that's not true. And the reason why I say that's not true is I like to just push back on people's thinking, right? Because at the end of the day, it's really about your quality of life, and it's about your purchasing power. And let's say that I decide to leave Los Angeles and move to Poland. And in Los Angeles, I got billionaires coming through the city every day. I got opportunities flying by me left and right. I could sign $1 million deals left and right. What type of opportunities do I have in Poland or Hungary? And I'm not just pulling places out of the blue, but my point is I've moved, I've lowered my tax, great, sure. But I could be making 5x the money. So I could just try to increase the revenue.
You should try to increase the revenue. Don't you think it's easier though in this kind of what COVID did and everything's going remote to certainly pressing the flesh as it were? We have this conference. Don't you think it's easier than it ever was before? To work with people all over the world.
Sure, it certainly is. And I'm a nomad myself, right? So we'll talk about that as well. But I think for me, you want to think about both sides of the equation. Can I increase my revenue, and can I also decrease my taxes?
And this is why I would push, and we talked about why I didn't move to Bali. We had a guy come through, an old customer of ours many years ago, had a boardroom meeting. He said, you're not going to build a $100 million valuation company, guys, living in Chiang Mai, living in Phuket. And as companies grow larger and larger, you see there is some logic to that. Could you do it in Singapore? Could you do it in maybe in Kuala Lumpur if you have a global team? Yeah. But to me, there is definitely a mindset. Yeah. If you're going to somewhere to slow down and just focus on the savings and not focus on increasing, that's where I would totally agree with you.
When you said last night about your friend or whoever who's been in Poland and hasn't had a good steak in years, I was like, oh, I couldn't live without a good steak for years, right? So that's a thing for me. But back to I spent a year in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has this Galt's Gulch feel where all these high-level people have moved to Puerto Rico. And so the type of network that there is amazing. Yeah. And so like the networking was even maybe better there than it is in Southern California for me.
You would say in Dubai also, I run into a ton of folks in, let's say, the cryptocurrency space who are in Dubai, or the Cayman Islands, maybe it's a little bit lesser, Singapore. I mean, there's places, Puerto Rico being one of them.
Yeah. So I thought it was amazing for that. But so I would say for me, it's freedom first. Like I just don't want to be locked down ever again.
And what is freedom to Mark Moss?
So freedom for me, I like to think of it as like a liberty. And so it's freedom from coercion. Free to choose, make choices that for my own life that lead to my own ends. So freedom from coercion. When I say you have to take the jab or quit your job, either one of those choices push me into your decisions, right? I want to make my choices that lead to my ends, right? If that makes sense. So freedom from coercion, I think, is probably the best statement of that. And so that's number one. And then, I mean, back to California, I mean, so as crazy it is, we're pretty free. The biggest problem there is probably the schools.
They don't want educated people coming out of those schools,
and just the stuff that they're teaching the kids in schools is just horrible. So my kids just don't go to schools, right? Not there.
What do you do?
So we do homeschool.
Homeschooling.
Yeah, and my daughter's doing now like a homeschool private school. A couple days a week at private school, a couple days a week at.
For parents who, you're saying you're nomadic, and you're homeschooling, what do you tell the parents who are saying, well, I can't leave California, I can't leave the U.S., I can't go anywhere because my kids are in school? What's your message to them?
Well, even when my kids were in school, we traveled all the time. We're surfers, so we're nomadic, right? Surfers want to go to the most remote places in the world because we're trying to find waves where there's nobody there. And so even when our kids were in school, we'd take them out for long periods of time. As a matter of fact, I was talking about being here in Mexico City. We just pulled our kids out of school for 4 months, just signed them out, gone for 4 months. We traveled the world, then we came back later.
And did they give you a hard time?
Yeah, they gave you.
Of course they do.
Yeah, of course. They said you can't do that. I said, well, I can. They're my kids. No, you can't. I said, well, we can, and we did, and we checked them out. We put them back in. We checked them right back in, and they didn't miss a beat.
There's coercion, right? We'll tell you what to do with your kids,
right?
Yeah.
So, we do it. I think a lot of people put these self-limitations on themselves.
For sure.
Right? And of course, some people are in W-2 jobs, and they just don't have that option as well.
More and more so today, but sure. So let's go back to the footprint. You're in California.
So the footprint.
You're buying you bought a ranch in Texas.
So I bought a place in Texas, and the thinking behind that was there's a chance that the world continues to go into this authoritarian regime, the United States specifically, going back into a kind of a pandemic type of level lockdown. There's plenty of black swans out there that are being talked about, more pandemics coming, all these types of things, attacks on food and energy and whatnot. And so I think understanding the importance of community is a really big piece, being around other like-minded people, and being more sovereign, right? Being able to control more variables of my own life, so food, energy, and community. And so this place in Texas, I found an opportunity to do that. I have other friends that have moved out there and bought ranchettes, we'll call them, smaller places. And the ability, we have cows and goats there. We have the ability to grow food if we want. We're in a part of Texas that's gun-toting, freedom-loving, steak-eating, Bible-thumping, good community people.
Leave me alone.
That you'd want to be around, right? And so I can control my food, I can control my energy, I have my community, et cetera. And so I thought, if things go to a place, unfortunately, if they'd break down to a place, then I have that as an option. So I want to keep that. But part of me I'm a surfer, and I like to vacation in places with dirt roads. And so part of me is like, why would I want to hunker down on a ranch and try to protect my property when I could just go live on the beach in El Salvador and surf and fish every day?
So you're also doing some stuff, you're building communities in El Salvador.
So I've been working a lot with the community in El Salvador down in Bitcoin Beach. Right. And so going down there regularly, working with the community. And this is a big piece, I think, for your audience and for everybody I talk to as well. Also here in mainland Mexico, Puerto Escondido, I spend a lot of time there, a couple trips a year. We do community outreach there. I like to do mission trips. I like to go try and help out. So I've spent a lot of time in the community there. And I'm also building a house in Mexico, but it's in Baja. It's not on mainland Mexico. But the point, I think, with those two is that I'm cultivating community. So if I needed to go somewhere, I know exactly where to go. I know people who would take me in on their couch. I know where the stores are. I know how to get around. And so for people that go, well, I don't have any money. I can't do this. It's like everyone could do it, right? I'm building communities in those areas. So I have those communities. I have another one in Mexico I'm actually building a house in. And again, it gives me options. So why hunker down in Texas when I could just go be in Mexico? Well, what if Mexico's bad? Well, then I can go to El Salvador. What if El Salvador's bad, right? So, just try to have as many options.
I think people don't realize, I push back on this, everything's going to pot, there'll be nowhere to go. And that to me seems like an excuse for, I just want to stay in Texas.
I think so, but I think there's also, I think that's a lack of understanding because they haven't traveled enough. And so because I've been all over Mexico and Central America, I know, and I'm sure you know, but I know there's plenty of places that if the world collapsed, they would never know. Right? They would never know. And like these authoritarians that want to like really take over control of cities, they're not going to go to the countryside here. Like there's no return on that violence for them. And so there's plenty of places that I could go to that they would never know if society broke down, and it wouldn't really change the way of life there.
So you're saying what we've been telling people is if you're not going to move, if you want to stay in California or you want to have the backup in Texas, at least build international infrastructure. And you're taking that one step further beyond just the homes, the residences, the passports, and saying, what's a great idea? Build a community. So you want to go to places where you can build a community.
Yeah.
Latin America perhaps is much more open.
Yeah.
I think you've probably found that.
Yep. Yeah, I love, for me, I love Mexico, Latin America, as you say. I mean, it's close to home for me. The weather's great. I love the food. I mean, tacos all day.
Can't beat it.
I could have tacos all day. I'm a surfer, so I want to be around waves. So there's plenty of waves, great waves at that. And so it really works with me and my lifestyle as well. And I think, again, going back to the community aspect, I think life is about giving, right? Life is about providing value to others. We make money. I try to teach my kids, you get paid for the value you provide to the world.
Yep.
Just punch some buttons at McDonald's.
Nobody's teaching that in the California schools.
No one teaches them that, right? And so back to building communities, like I am actively going down these communities to provide value to them. Mm-hmm. So I find the churches and community centers and what can I do to help? How can I support you? And by giving that value, now I have this whole community that has reciprocity back to me. And so it's not about like me trying to go in there and figure out how I can get myself elevated in the community. No. It's like going in under and building that up and building that goodwill.
The best way to create value is actually to create value, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a topic that I try and bring up that more people should talk about in this area. Because the perception, especially in the Western media today, is if you're successful, if you're into Bitcoin or if you're making a lot of money, that you're some greedy pig.
Yeah.
And I think there's, not just for the image reasons, but because I've always been raised from 8 years old to give back and to give to various causes, I think there should be more talk of that in this. Why don't you think there's more talk of that?
Well, I think the argument has changed to almost demonize people who are rich, and to your point, the greedy business owners. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because a business owner is a servant. I have to serve other people's needs and wants and desires. Like whether that's a service-based business where like we're giving massages or chiropractic treatment or health treatment, or I'm serving you meals, or I'm building products that you want to buy. A business owner is meeting the needs of people. That's the opposite of greedy.
My father always said, everyone's got a boss. I said, well, who's your boss, Dad? He said, the customers are my boss. If I screw them, it's over.
Yeah. The problem is the fiat money system that we have today distorts all of that. And so what happens is Vladimir Putin said the best way to debauch or destroy capitalism is to debauch the currency. And through inflation, we can artificially confiscate. But what he says at the end is that through a series of inflation, we can confiscate until the best way to generate wealth is through gambling and theft. And so what happens is through the money system, now people are getting rich with dollars through options trading, stock trading, crypto trading. And so those people are not creating value for anybody.
That's a controversial statement for a lot of folks in those areas.
Well, it can be controversial, but I think it's true. If you sell me XYZ crypto, I sell it back to you, you sell it back to me, we haven't created any value.
There's certainly a difference when you see someone who's got $100 million, and we work with these folks, who built up a business over 10, 20 years, and somebody who, did some trades and they made it in a year.
Right.
The personality is different.
And the reason why is because the business owner who's built up that business has made a career off of listening to customers and serving their needs versus someone who's just traded a couple of cryptocurrencies back and forth and got lucky and made it big. And it's the difference between the lottery winner and the business builder, right? And so there are differences, and it's unfortunate, it's the fiat money system that's created that. Now, if you can't beat them, join them. And so back to...
which is exactly what Wall Street Bets says, by the way.
Back to Lenin's quote, and so the best way to get wealthy is through gambling and theft. And so unfortunately, in our society today, in a fiat money system, the best way to get wealthy today is gambling and theft. And so but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that really we get wealthy by providing value.
Absolutely. I don't think most people understand that these days. And to me, that's one of the things when we look at Western society, people just don't want to understand that anymore because they're too busy trying to demonize. Somehow, if you're running a small shop, maybe that's acceptable, but much beyond that, you're just a terrible person, and that's being weaponized against people.
And it goes back to the fiat money system as well. So you look at basketball, LeBron James. I don't know. I'm not a big basketball fan, but let's say he's still the best basketball player in the world or whatever, and he makes the most money and he's the best athlete. Nobody looks at that and says he's evil, he's greedy.
Absolutely not.
But if you did it in business, you're evil and greedy.
Beyonce is perfectly entitled.
And the reason why, I believe, is because the rules of basketball are fair. Everybody has to abide by the exact same set of rules. Now, it's not fair that LeBron's taller and faster than I am, but if I play basketball against him, I have to abide by the same rules he does. Now, I might approach the game differently because of my height and speed or whatever, but the monetary system is not fair. And everybody knows it's not fair. And everybody knows that a lot of these people got ahead because they have cheated the rules. And you and I aren't able to do that. And so I think that's why there's this big difference in thinking.
And you're certainly not able to do it in the United States. Fun fact, our high school team played LeBron James. I said, I don't know what. Imagine playing by the same rules. We got crushed.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a competition. But I want to talk about, you mentioned, Lynn, the Uncommunist Manifesto, the new book. What is an Uncommunist Manifesto?
So the Uncommunist Manifesto is hopefully uncommunistizing or whatever the word may be. I haven't really thought about that one. But, communism seems like an old idea, and it seems like an old word, but it is alive more than it has ever been today. It's just been rebranded. And so in the Communist Manifesto, and I've spent a lot of time studying capitalism and all the works of the best Austrian economists' work, and all the way back to Bastiat's The Law and Adam Smith and all of that. And I've also spent time studying communism and Karl Marx. But I actually hadn't read the Communist Manifesto until about 2 years ago. And in any debate, you should know your enemy, right? You should know their argument. And so I just hadn't read it, and I read it, and I was shocked. And I'm not shocked by a lot of stuff because I'm paying attention, but I was like, has anybody read this? And this was right around the time when the BLM leaders were coming out saying they were trained Marxists, if you remember that. And I'm like, so I read it, I'm like, has anybody read this? Because if anybody actually read this, they would not want this, right? That's what I thought. And so I just thought, man, if we could shine the light on this, so people could realize how bad it was, and then provide a better way.
Do you really believe that's true? Do you think that people in Western society would not go along with that?
I think the majority of people would not want that, yeah. So in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says, to summarize communism in one statement is the abolition of private property. One statement.
Don't you think that people want to live in a world of nuance? They want, well, he didn't really mean abolition. He meant don't you think people would take it in that direction?
I think if you walked out on the street, even in Mexico, but certainly in the United States, and you said, do you think we should outlaw all private property? I just can't imagine many people would want to go for that.
Okay.
I can't imagine. So he says that. Then he talks about how the bourgeoisie, the rich, they don't care about family. We should tear down the family. They only use their family for economic means. Women should be community property. Really, are feminists okay with that? Have they read that part? You know what I mean? So I thought we should kind of dig into that. And he says, so abolition of private property. And what does Klaus Schwab at the WEF say today? You'll own nothing and be happy. Karl Marx says that the government should handle the means of production, and the WEF says that we'll have a public-private partnership to manage all that, right? So it's like the same idea is just being recycled.
I love these public-private partnerships, by the way.
Yeah.
That's not crony capitalism.
Or fascism.
Right, what they hate. Yeah. So anyway, the Uncommunist Manifesto is removing this from society. That's your goal.
So the goal is that what we also see is that communism, again, now it's a neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism they call it, which is really like identity politics. And so what Marxism really was pitting two arbitrary groups of people against each other, the poor versus the rich. Right? And so the rich were oppressors and the poor were oppressed. Well, at what point do I become rich, and does that automatically make me an oppressor then? It's very arbitrary, right? And then if we take all the stuff away from the rich and give it to the poor, then everything's solved. So it's this very arbitrary thing. And today now neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism is that now it's everybody against each other, black versus white, men against women, straight against gay, et cetera, right? And so they've created this division. But what they've also done is they've created this victim mentality. So you can't get ahead. It's not your fault. Don't worry. You can't get ahead because you're oppressed. And if you had me, a savior, come in, I could fix this for you. And so we see this through the United States, through the West. Putin gave a speech in October, and he said at the WEF, and he said, "Hey, you Western nations with your woke ideologies, blurring the lines between men and women and breaking down families. You think this is progress?" He said, "This is not progress." He said, "These are the same dogmas taught by Marx and Engels that led to the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Russia wants nothing to do with that." So these are Western ideologies that are pushing these, and so it's breaking down society, pitting everybody against each other, but also pushing people to lower denominators of themselves. I'm a victim, I can't get ahead, and so it's a race. Well, I'm a woman. Well, I'm a woman immigrant. Well, I'm a gay woman immigrant, right? And so I think it creates this victim mentality. And so what we want, in the book, what we propose is a message of hope. And it's like, you're not a victim. You have lots to offer. So Karl Marx says, the poor have nothing to offer but their labor. And their labor never equates to capital. Well, I believe that you have intellectual capital, right? I believe that your ideas can lead to capital. And so rather than just trying to tear everybody down and make victims out of everybody, we want to build people up. Look, you have lots to offer. You have lots to gain. And so it's a message of hope. It's a way I think we can kind of turn the tides on this.
I think you quoted Socrates, who basically said, once it's gone, just let it go, move on to the next thing.
Socrates says, focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but building the new. Building the new. And so what I like to think about is, I can't change the education system in California, but I can pull my kids out and I can just teach them at home. And I can't change the media, mainstream media, but I've started my own media network, as you have. Right? I can't change the financial system, but I can certainly pull my money out and move into a Bitcoin.
Isn't this one of the frustrations? It's a very entrepreneurial train of thought. You said you're an entrepreneur. To me, as a lifelong entrepreneur, I get frustrated when we focus too much on the World Economic Forum stuff. Like, to me, that's a form of victimhood. Just sit back. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to escape. Just like you just have to stay and fight. It just seems like a very kind of miserable outlook. And I like to say, there's always, when you're thinking entrepreneurially, some kind of solution to solve the problem. And you don't have to get hung up on the negative. Isn't there too much of that negative you think that people just want to cling to?
Well, the victim mentality. And I agree 100%.
You'll see it with libertarians.
Oh, I see it. Well, I see it all the time.
They complain about victims, but they do the same thing, don't they?
I get it. I mean, I get thousands of comments a week across all my social media platforms, and I see it all the time. Oh, this will never work because the government's going to outlaw it. Or this will never work because they're going to do this. And I'm like, shut up. You're just playing the victim mentality back to what Karl Marx tried to kind of push on everybody. And I agree with you. Like, we write our own future. My future is not set. It's up to me. And so I believe that we have lots of options. I like to say that I'm very bullish on when millions of entrepreneurs' backs are against the wall. Right? They're going to build. And I love the message that you push as well, because it's through competition that we win. Right? Through competition as we get better service products prices. And so when states are forced to compete, or when nations are forced to compete, that's how we change things.
Well, I mean, we've seen that dramatically to the point of Socrates. We've seen in your lifetime, my lifetime, countries you never thought about before, countries that were terrible, that are now very, very competitive, whether it's on freedom, whether it's on tax, whether it's on lifestyle. And so how do you look at that Socrates quote and saying, do we just go and build in places that are welcomed with open arms? Or, how do we balance that versus I want to stay where I'm from, it's comfortable? What's the balance?
Well, unfortunately, humans need their kind of breaking point. Like the drug addict that's your friend that needs rehab won't go to rehab until they hit rock bottom. And so, unfortunately, everybody needs to have their point of pain where they'll finally be motivated to move. I believe in chiropractic. I really do. A lot of people don't. I do. I've been going most of my life. But even as much as I believe in it, I don't go typically till I'm in pain. Right? And so we kind of need that point. So at what point has your freedom been taken away, or your money's been taken away to a point you're forced to move? And so everybody will reach that point at some point, I think. With Bitcoin specifically, a lot of people in New York getting a $15 cocktail are like, what the heck do we need private money that can't be confiscated for? But if you live in Lebanon, where you're trying to break into the bank to get your own money out of it, you get it. And so at some point, the pain point is high enough, and people will be forced to find a solution for that pain, whether that be a new monetary system that can't be seized or confiscated, or building some sort of a business that fits that void.
remember sitting in Turkey, it's a long time ago, so it's becoming a little blurrier, but talking to some UN bureaucrat, and he basically explained to me, oh, you're so silly. We like to give people the incremental change, the frog in the boiling pot. And to me, if you look back again throughout our lifetimes, don't you think those breaking points would have been hit if they just came suddenly rather than gradually?
Certainly, and they're coming a lot more suddenly than they have.
That's true.
And so if you look at, I love to look through history and look at these cycles. And one I like to look at is this 250-year political revolution cycle, and it's really broken down into 3 80-year cycles. And so in an 80-year cycle, you have like the fourth turning is a very popular one, like generational theory it's called. And in the fourth cycle, it's 4 20-year cycles. The last one is where all the change happens. And so it's the gradually then suddenly, right? So it's gradually, and then finally it all happens there. Lenin said that, not to keep quoting him, but there's decades where nothing happens, there's days where decades seem to happen. And so what happens is it's gradually. But what happens is right at the end, a wounded animal backed in the corner is the most dangerous. And the nation state, as they're dying right now, their source of power, the fiat money system, is dying, like it's running out of ammo. The internet has caused them to lose their grip on the narrative. They can't control the narrative anymore. And as they're losing their grip, they're grasping, trying to hang on to whatever they can. But the more they grasp and try to hang on, the more people are pushing back. And I really think they jumped the shark on this one. They're the Icarus that has the wax wings and they flew too close to the sun. They could have just kept flying around and had a good life like Icarus, but they had to go too close to the sun. And so, what happened in Canada when they seized those, from the trucker protests, they seized accounts. That was too far. And everybody now knows that my money in the bank is not safe. Everybody knows that. And then when it happened to Russia, the whole world got put on notice. And Putin is now pounding his fist on the table, telling nations, look, if our money's not safe, neither is yours. And so I think what happens is now they've gotten to a point where they have to escalate this so fast, because really what we're in is a war of information and money, and they're losing both of those. And so how can they win that war? They have to escalate. They have to speed things up. But as they speed things up, they're not ready to transition. And I think ultimately that will be their downfall.
I want to challenge again the point on do you want private property abolished? Because look at what happened in Russia. Whatever you think about that, you know Putin, we're going to take your yacht and we're just going to keep the money.
Well, all the oligarchs got their yachts seized.
Well, but so
no due process.
No one's complaining about that.
Well,
so it's always, isn't it always what's good? Hey, just leave me out of it. Even we have people that I know, they got $50 million. Biden wants a tax on the guy with $100 million. All right, I can get behind that, some of them will say.
Yeah.
It's eventually going to come for you. And that's I think, the nuance that people would like to ignore when they're like, oh, sure, take someone else's property.
I think so, but what I'm really seeing, and I'm sure you're probably seeing the same thing, just because, I'm getting thousands of comments a week, so I kind of have like this, my finger on the pulse, it seems like, or maybe it's an echo chamber, I don't know. But I'm almost seeing this like bifurcation of people, where you have half of these people that are becoming the victims and becoming the sheep, and they don't care and just govern me harder and leave it up to the experts. And that's discouraging. But I'm also seeing this renaissance of people waking up and realizing, if I need to take this into my own control. look at all the people that are here at this event, right? And so I think we're seeing this bifurcation. And to the point that you're making, when it happened in Canada, Jordan Peterson got on social media and said, hey, I talked to my friends in the military. They told me I should get all my money out of the banks. Everyone should go get their money out of the banks. And they did. And the bank run is, I think, what caused Canada to reverse that. Same thing in Russia. So when it happened to Russia, now China's been preparing for sanctions. Right? All the other nations around the world in the BRICS agreement, they're all preparing for sanctions. So yes, I might be okay if you go, I'm $50 million, I might be okay if you go tax $100 million, but I'm also going to be taking steps to protect myself, knowing you're probably coming for me next.
You should be. Maybe there's too much optimism in the Western world, and so that's why we're talking here, and I know you'll be talking about what are some of the alternatives. For you, it's Mexico, it's El Salvador. To that point, is El Salvador, it's a country a lot of folks in Bitcoin are very interested in.
Yeah.
Is it a competitive country? And what steps are they doing to make it more competitive?
Competitive in which way, right? So
freedom, finance, lifestyle?
So I think for freedom, yes. So when the whole world was still locking down in the pandemic, I think Bukele might have been one of the first people to say, no requirements, no vaccine requirements, no forced injection, none of that. I think he might be in the first country to actually open it up, if not one of the few. So for freedom, yes. There's a lot of talk of him becoming this dictator, and he's kind of getting rid of a lot of the parliament and people that are kind of holding back some of the change. But he's making really good change, in my opinion. And I'm not in the country, so I can't really say. But I think from a freedom standpoint, I would say it's pretty good. From a lifestyle standpoint, it's a very poor nation. Very poor. I mean, you can still see oxen and carts around there, right?
It's one of the few places in the world I kind of felt a little unsafe. I rarely feel unsafe. I felt a little unsafe in San Salvador. Maybe not in the beach.
So when it comes, and I've mostly been around the beaches. And so when it comes to is there good medical care? Well, not really, right? And so I think on lifestyle, if you love the beach, you love surfing, you love fishing, you love being left alone, it's great for that. If you're older or you're just somebody who thinks you might need medical care or want access to that, it's probably not good for that. As far as access to business, it's probably not super good because a business needs to have customers that are willing and able, so they need to have money. And so in a slow economy, it's hard to make business unless you're an online entrepreneur, and then you can, right? So I think it's got pros and cons, and I think go where you're treated best, but what's best? And so best is different.
It's up for everybody.
Right, it's up for everybody, right? And so I think overall, it probably ranks really high on the cost of living, so your money buys more. It ranks good on freedom, it ranks good on beaches, but it ranks really low on development and services.
And that's been the question in the last couple of years. I mean, we had people who were living in the Cayman Islands who thought, hey, they're getting too heavy-handed. I'm selling my $5 million house. And they said, all those things are important to me. I want the same weather, I want the freedom, and I want to keep my taxes very, very low. Yeah. And they're going to Nicaragua, for example. I mean, imagine multimillionaires. What has happened to the world where multimillionaires are saying, I want to move to Nicaragua?
Yeah, and Nicaragua is also very poor, like El Salvador, about the same, very low services, etc. Now, you are starting to get these enclaves of lots of rich people moving behind gated neighborhoods and things like that. In Nicaragua, they have Rancho Santana, and so you're getting that those enclaves, but it's happening slowly. And I think people just have to figure out what they want to optimize for.
But that's something that you wouldn't have imagined that many years ago, that you're going to move. First of all, we have these imaginary lines on a map, and whether, again, freedom or finance, whatever it is that drives me, whatever it is that's my best, I can simply move to a place that looks maybe not entirely like something in Orange County, California, but has some of a semblance of that. And now, because I'm in this different spot that feels largely the same, and I can build my communities, you're saying, I'm treated so much differently in these ways.
Well, it's a big trend, and the catalyst is technology. So thousands of years of history, it's always technology that changes the world. And so if you look at the Industrial Revolution about 250 years ago, it took everybody from the farms and the cottage industry and put them into cities and factories. And then that allowed giant nation states to grow, and everyone had to move to America, but not just America, New York, Chicago, San Francisco. And that allowed the nation state to get really big because their returns on violence were very low. It's easy for them to just extract wealth from that. But now we have a new technology, and that's the internet, really, right? And the internet has now allowed us to create online entrepreneurial companies instead of these big conglomerates. But more importantly, it's allowed us to live wherever we want. And the pandemic really sped that up. So San Francisco, everyone's fleeing as fast as they can, and Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming are blowing up. People always wanted to live in Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado, but they couldn't because there were no jobs. But today they can take those jobs with them wherever they go, but they can also go to Playa del Carmen, or they can go to Florianopolis, Brazil, or whatever. And so I think that's a big shift. And so for the last 250 years, the pendulum has been swinging towards centralization, and now technology has created a catalyst, and this pendulum will swing back to decentralization. And I think we'll continue to see people move to Nicaragua, El Salvador, Florianopolis, etc.
You have some big trends. I know you've talked about government is going to try very hard to control, of course, money, power and energy, food. Talk about that. Yeah, so
Henry Kissinger, he basically laid this out for us. So Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State for the United States back in World War II. He studied under some known Nazi Germans, and he was also a professor, and Klaus Schwab studied under Kissinger. So kind of interesting there. But Kissinger told us back then, he said, control the food, you control the people, control the energy, you control the continent, control the money, you control the world. So he taught Klaus Schwab, and what are we really seeing as the biggest attack today? Energy, food, and money. So we have global energy crisis happening all over the world, right? They're trying to shut down energy as we know it to make this great transition that we can talk about if you want, but bans on fossil fuel, phasing out gasoline-powered cars, move to renewables, or as I like to call them, unreliables, right? Intermittent power, if you want to call it that. And that obviously hasn't worked, and now it's created massive shortages. I mean, Europe, I believe the European Union is on the verge of breaking up. I think Germany might be forced to choose NATO or keeping their people warm here in the next couple of months, and that's going to be very interesting. And so, control the energy. Now, when you control the energy, now without natural gas, we're not making enough fertilizer. Without fertilizer, we don't grow food. And so now we have massive food shortages. With Sri Lanka, they tried to become what they were, out of a 1 to 100, they were a 98 on their ESG score. They were the poster child for the World Economic Forum, and they are now bankrupt. They tried to force the farmers to change the way they tried to cut down on their fertilizer for ESG scores. Then they couldn't grow their crops. The farmers quit farming. They didn't have their tea exports. Their tea exports went down. Their GDP crashed. They can't even afford to import oil anymore. Now, that's a problem because they export food to the rest of the world, and we're seeing it throughout Holland, right? They're taking over the farmers. They want to cut back on their nitrogen fertilizer. Holland is a major exporter of food to the rest of the European Union. The UN said that almost 868 million people, almost a billion people, per the UN, could starve in the next 24 months. So when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in Russia, about 25 million people starved to death. In the Mao's Great Leap Forward, about 50 million. Those are rookie numbers. We're talking about almost a billion. And at a time when the food is so scarce, shouldn't we be trying to increase it? But instead they're continuing to attack it. Now Trudeau in Canada wants to cut back, right, on the farming and the fertilizer. Even in the United States, we're seeing the same thing. So attack the food, attack the energy, and then the money. So now CBDCs, they're rushing out as fast as they can.
New from Biden now pushing that out.
New from Biden, obviously the CBDCs have already been put in place in China, of course. Why not? Why wouldn't China be the first with their social credit score system? And now under Biden in the United States as well. And the ECB is working on one in there as well. And even the IMF wants to roll out their ESDR at some point soon.
Yeah, and so to me, your thought is have multiple options because this stuff won't find its way everywhere.
Well, for a couple of reasons. So this fails. Central planning always fails. You can't create money out of thin air. That doesn't work. And so we see the distortions for 50 years now. In 1971, the world severed its ties to gold, to a hard money asset, a hard asset. And so we're in this 51 years of a monetary experiment. And look how bad it's gone in 51 years. Now, you could say, well, look at the skyscrapers and all that, but look how society has been distorted. Look at the amounts of debt that we have. And so it's gotten really bad and it's at its last legs. And so it won't work. And I believe that through having these options, through moving around, going where you're treated best, it adds to the competition. And so when El Salvador says, hey, look at us, we're open. We're going to take away our taxes. We're not going to require any medications, any of that. They've attracted massive amounts of investment capital there. And then other countries around that, like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, will go, well, shoot, we're open too.
What have you found with the people in El Salvador? Because one of the things we're talking about here this week is what's like a non-dom tax system where you make $10 million, but it only cost you, your cost of living is $300,000. So you're going to pay tax at a very high level on $300,000. And you're paying much more than the average person in a certain country. These are mostly European countries. But yet there are folks like in the UK, how dare these people come who wouldn't otherwise come here and pay us $150,000 when the average person pays, $10,000, pounds, whatever. Do you see a difference? Because I do. In places like El Salvador, where it's like, yeah, all right, please, we'll take some investment.
Yeah. It really comes down to the abundance or scarcity mindset. And so I'll flip it to Puerto Rico. Because Puerto Rico is dealing with the same thing, right? So I was living there. And so Puerto Rico has no economy. There's a famous activist, and I forget her name, but she's very vocal, and she wrote this whole article, and she was so mad because 20 years ago she had to leave Puerto Rico because there was no jobs for her, there was no economy, there was nowhere for her to make a living. So she had to move to America. Well, now they've attracted all this wealth through their Act 22 and Act 60 programs that they have. And now Puerto Rico is booming, right? People are buying cars, people are opening restaurants, people are buying houses, construction's taking off.
Prices have shot through the roof.
Shot through the roof. And now she's so mad because all these rich people have moved there and created this booming economy, but now it's getting expensive for people that live there. And she's mad, but it's like, You couldn't even live there 20 years ago because there was no economy, and now there's an economy. So I think if you look at from a place of abundance, you want to attract wealth creators, you want to attract business owners, you want to attract investment capital, and then I think the country will flourish, and then hopefully it flows to everybody.
Why do you think most people don't have an abundance mindset?
Yeah, so the difference is, abundance mindset. So I believe wealth is abundant, and wealth is not a zero-sum game. So Jeff Bezos became the richest guy in the world by starting Amazon. Millions of people have now become millionaires because they can sell products on Amazon. Those millions of people would never have gotten wealthy.
Would have been a lot harder
if he hadn't created that. Bill Gates, who I'm not a big fan of, but he created personal computers and gave them to everybody in the world. Look how much value he created, and now how much wealth has been created because now they have computers.
And yet people think there should be some kind of cap, as if, again, money doesn't come from creating value. Oh, well, these people change the entire way you conduct your life.
Right.
What should that be worth? $10 million bucks?
Yeah.
Here's your gift card?
So status is a zero-sum game. In order for me to get higher, I have to push you lower. See, wealth is not, status is. And so I think a lot of these people, they operate, these world leaders, they operate on a game of status. And so in order for me to have more control, you have to have less control. I think there's been some of it also is this Malthusian fear spell the world's kind of been under. Thomas Malthus had this theory that the population would increase so fast linearly, and the supplies of the world would go down, and at some point we'd reach this cataclysmic event where we'd cease to exist, we'd have enough resources. And so they use that as a way to take control. Look, we're going to run out of fill in the blank, food, we're going to run out of oil, and so we have to control all of this, and that's a scarcity mindset. It's not true. The world operated on a whole theory called peak energy, and by 2008, human ingenuity came up with a new technology that now we have more energy, natural gas and oil than we know what to do with, because technology found a new way to do that. And so human ingenuity, there's no return. I mean, there's no cap on that. And so it's just an abundance mindset. And why do people have those two? I think culture, right? Education.
Hard to fix.
Yeah, it's very hard to fix.
Culture, very important denominator in where to go where you're treated best. You were living in Puerto Rico for a year.
Yeah.
Act 60, tax savings. How did you find it? Why did you leave?
So I'd known about it since about 2015-ish, 2016-ish, and it's been on my radar. As a surfer, I think about places I can go and surf. It's a beautiful island in the Caribbean, and the surf is great. And I live in Southern California, which is beautiful, but I mean, it's cold in the winter. In the winter, the water's 55 degrees, and I got to put on a 4'3" wetsuit, and I'm still freezing out there, right? Puerto Rico, the water's 85 year round. I mean, it's beautiful, right? So who wouldn't want to live in a tropical paradise? What really kicked the can over the edge, I would say, is when the pandemic broke out. California and New York were trying to outcompete each other for being the most restrictive, see how hard they could lock everybody down, and California was just completely shut down. And again, I said earlier, like, if there's any place I can go live for free, why would I live locked down? And so I was like, well, I'm done with this. I mean, I don't want to live here.
Gavin Newsom says, where are you going to go?
Yeah, there's plenty of places to go, right? Yeah. So I said, fine, then I think maybe we should go check out Puerto Rico. Now is probably a good time for us to go check it out. And so it had been on my radar for a long period of time. Obviously, the tax situation is super attractive. But the weather's attractive, the surf's attractive. But then remember I said earlier, people will only move when the pain is high enough. For me, that pain came when we couldn't move. And actually what really was the biggest punch in the gut, and really my extra motivation for what I'm doing today, is we're at the dinner table. I have two daughters, and and they were wrecked. I mean, this destroyed their lives. And people don't really understand the impact this made on kids. They were both in like elementary, and my older daughter was just starting high school. I mean, these are like their main years. 2 years of their life were taken. And anyway, California was so strict with the lockdowns and whatnot. And we're sitting at the dinner table, and my daughter goes, well, at least we can go outside now. And I'm like, wait, at least we can go outside of our house? Like, this is not the world I grew up in. Like, I grew up in a free country. Now we're allowed to go outside. So anyway, the pain was high enough. I said, let's just leave. And so we did. So we packed up. We went to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico at the time was open. So much more open, let's say, than
So you think does it still have more freedom?
Well, let me tell you the story. So it was more open at the time. So we moved there. It was very tough. I had never moved before, so it was tough. I didn't know how to meet people. You move around all the time. I never moved. Where do you even go? And how do you meet people? I guess church or school or sports, but in a pandemic, when those things aren't happening, it's very difficult. So it was a little tough transition, but we found our way. We met some really cool people. I built up a good community. We loved it. But then Puerto Rico started trying to get crazy on the lockdowns again. And so then in, I want to say August or September, the governor put a new, vaccine requirement, a mandate in effect, and you basically couldn't go anywhere without showing your papers and whatnot. And where we were on the west side of the island was very rural over there.
Like Rincon.
That's where we were in Rincon, right? And it's very rural, so it wasn't like the city. We couldn't go to the city anymore because you couldn't go anywhere in the city without showing papers. But on Rincon, it was life as normal. But then in December 27th. I know the date because I left 2 days later. December 27th, the governor of Puerto Rico said, everywhere is now mandatory crackdown, and all of a sudden Rick Hahn went and just clamped down on everybody. And I said, okay, peace out, I'm out.
So you had your 1 year of potential tax savings and didn't work for you. And so that's why you're saying, have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C, have a plan D.
It didn't work for me for two reasons. One, my daughter was in high school. I talked to someone earlier today. He moved from Canada down to the Yucatan Peninsula, and his daughter is in high school, but it was a great move for her. They wanted her to get her out of her social circle, and she's thriving there. For me, it was the opposite. My daughter had a thriving social circle in California, and there it was torture for her. And she hated it, and I hated it for her. And so for that reason, my younger daughter, she met a bunch of friends. She had a community. She loved it. She could have stayed, and she wants to go back and visit. But for my older daughter, it didn't work. And so it was between that and then the lockdowns. Those were the two things that changed it for me.
So the main message here is you have to have a community.
You have to have a community. That is, I think, always going to be the most important.
Your big predictions in closing for 2023. What is the year ahead?
I think the year ahead for 2023 is going to be, unfortunately, more pain before we have hope. So first of all, I'm not really a doom and gloomer. I believe there's massive hope. I believe this all fails and there's prosperity on the other side. I believe there's more pain ahead. So I would say throughout 2023, specifically in the West, we're going to see continued creep of authoritarianism, more censorship, more lockdowns, more control. Specifically in the United States, they're going after it full bore, attacking freedom of speech and all these things. So I think we're going to continue to see that escalate. I think we're going to continue to see more volatility. So we're going to see more energy crisis happen. So I would imagine we're going to continue to see energy prices spiking, continue to see power outages happening, rationing throughout Europe and the United States. It's already happening in California and the United States, for example. So more energy shortages, spiking energy prices, more authoritarianism, more censoring, lower quality of life, unfortunately. I believe by the end of 2023, we'll probably have some sort of either a correction to the downside or at least stagflation with volatility. Probably by the end of 2023, we'll be coming out of it and start to see inflation really starting to skyrocket, I would imagine, by then.
And so for someone who has a family, by the way, people in the West, I think, will continue to say we live in a free country. At least we've got a free country. I don't know how long that's sustainable.
Let me put that into numbers, not opinions. Let's put it into numbers. Okay? So in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx lays out 10 points of communism. So in order to have a communist society, it must have these 10 things. Number 3, a progressive tax system. Does the U.S. have that? Number 5, a central bank. Well, as a matter of fact, the U.S. has 7 of the 10 points in place. So I would ask the question mathematically, is the U.S. a free capitalist society or a communist society?
Why do you think so? Okay, most people don't lay it out like that. How do you convince people? You have 7 out of 10. Are they going to get the other 3? I mean, how do you convince people this isn't what you think it is? And maybe El Salvador has only 4.
Well, I think it's a spectrum. So you asked earlier, or you had mentioned earlier, people don't get the nuance, right? So there's nuance. So it's a spectrum of pure freedom or pure communism, and we're somewhere in here, and it's moving further and further and further. I had this older lady. I'm not sure how old she was, 60s probably, and she was from Russia. And she was like, I can't believe it how it is here in the United States. Like, I tried to have a birthday party at the park for my daughter, but we had to get a permit to have a party at the park, and then we could only work with the approved vendors. And I wanted to have this meeting at my office for these people, but then I had to have a permit to get the, she's like, in Russia, we didn't have to get any of this. And like, I think about communist Russia as being so restrictive, and she was like blown away how restrictive it was here, needing permits for everything. So I think it's a spectrum. The rules are in place, but even in a communist society, there's still freedom, right? You could argue that the Mexico, you know, the new leadership in Mexico might be leaning more towards authoritarianism and communism than you would consider in America. But at the same time, most people report that they feel more free when they're here in Mexico, because even though the laws are here, people aren't breathing down your neck all the time, and so it's a spectrum.
And so for the family who says, okay, follows my advice, I said, for everyone threatening to move to Canada if Trump gets elected or Obama, whatever, why don't you move to Mexico? You have a family. What's the advice if you want to protect yourself? How do you set that up?
Yeah. So the plans are, one, dig your well before you're thirsty. Once you're thirsty, it's too late.
It's too late.
It's too late. So start to think about this now. Now, people ask me all the time, Mark, where do I go? There's nowhere you can go to have it all. So figure out what is important to you, optimize for that. I need to go somewhere there's waves. You may not like waves, right? You might want mountains. George, my good friend George Gammon, he lives in the mountains, right, in Colombia. So figure out what you want. So 1, dig your well before thirsty. 2, figure out what it is you want. 3, start traveling to find those areas that you would like. 4, start to cultivate communities there. Even if you can't afford to buy anything or not ready to commit, start to cultivate communities there. And then I guess ultimately 5, pay attention, because the walls are closing in. There's the story of how do you catch a wild boar or a wild pig, and you put some feed on the ground, and every day it knows to come eat the feed. And then one day there's one wall here, and it still comes to eat the feed. And the next day there's another wall, and it eats the feed. And then another day is a third wall, and it comes to eat the feed. And finally, the 4th wall goes in. So you want to be paying attention. Where are the walls coming in, and when's that final piece coming in? Pay attention to that. And then, unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunately, the reality is that without money, you have no options. I mean, you can get by with more or less money, but you're going to need some. If you're going to up and move your family from one place to another, you need to have some resources to do that. So focus on building, growing, and protecting your wealth, because that wealth is what's going to give you options.
Get your income up, get your wealth up, and I think that's great advice. Exactly as I would say. Mark Moss, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.